Okay guys, so here is a video that I'm going to do for you. It's the 7 exercises that I would say when done a little too much, if we add them into programming on a consistent basis, it can compromise the integrity of joints and muscles. So I'm going to go over those 7 and want you to keep that in mind when you are programming each week. So we're going to start off with the most basic. And I think we've all kind of heard this at this point, that crunches aren't always the best exercise. And I'll just explain why. So when we're doing crunches, when we sit all the way up, what tends to happen is we're flexing that low back. We're flexing the lumbar spine, and when we do that time and time again, we tend to compress the anterior side of the vertebrae, which can cause issues. And we tend to use, we're not actually using our abs that much. We're using a lot of our hip flexors, which for the majority of people, our hip flexors are already tight. So we want to avoid doing too many sit-ups, especially over time. If we're consistently doing sit-ups, we keep doing that, keep repeating that movement of flexion of the low back, which is never a good thing. In lots of repetitions. So a really simple fix for that one is doing the likes of a Kimura sit-up, to where we use the elbow for leverage, to where we actually are then using the abs to pull ourselves forward. We're not flexing at the low back because we're not sitting all the way up, and we're taking out the hip flexors by using the elbow. So that's the first exercise. The next one is the high pull. So what you'll see a lot of times with people in a high pull or in an upright row, what they'll do is they'll pull in here, or if they're using a kettlebell or just one dumbbell, they'll go here, and those elbows will get up higher than the hands. And if you've ever been to a physical therapist for shoulder issues, one of the first things they actually do is to test for impingement, is to get you into this position, and then they will push your hand down to see if you have any impingements. So if we're putting ourselves in that position with weight on a consistent basis in our programming, over time we will create impingement in that shoulder. So when we're doing high pulls, we want to make sure that we're getting a little external rotation as we go with it. So if we're pulling up, we're still hitting the traps as we want to, we're still hitting those deltoids, but we're pulling back versus being down in this compromising position here. So we're pulling up and back, almost like fists are pointing out right in front, and that's a brief pause at the top. So we're not holding that position, compromising the shoulder. So that's that one. Or if we're gonna do an actual high pull versus an upright row, we can toss that dumbbell up so we can still get that shrug of the shoulders, and we catch it on the way down, so we're not again compromising that shoulder girdle. So that's the second exercise. The third one we're going to look at is chest flies. So while it can be a good exercise, and the actual action of the chest is to horizontally adduct the chest, this can again put us in a very compromising position if not done well and properly. So if we're doing flies, a lot of times what we'll see people do is the hands will come above the shoulders, and that's a very compromising position. So where we really want to be is hands down below the shoulders as we pull together. But even at that, it still puts that shoulder in a very compromising position if it's not done perfectly well. So it's that squeezing the shoulder blades, making sure that the hands aren't above the shoulders, keeping them in that stable position. So it can be a little bit compromising. So something else that we can do instead of that would be attaching a band to an upright and taking that band and punching through here. Okay, so we take the band, we're nice and stable here. We use the torso to rotate, and then we punch through, so we're still horizontally adducting the chest or the shoulder, and we're still activating that chest in the same fashion, but a lot safer. That's the third one. The next one would be a military press. So what I'll see people do, this is what it says now. So with the military press, you'll see people in that compromised position again. So the ribs are flared, the elbows are back in line with the shoulders, and they're pressing here. And again, this is putting the shoulder in and the low back in a compromising position. And the scapular plane is not back here. The scapular plane is going to be at about 45 degrees. So if you were to put the arm out here, the scapular plane, where it's going to be the most stable, is about 45 degrees from the body. So that's where we want those presses. We want the elbows out about 45 degrees. We can go up overhead. We don't need the full extension all the way overhead. We can have a little bit of a bend in the elbow at the top, but that's going to be a lot safer than a military press. All right, the next one would be a good morning. Now, it's a good exercise if it's done well, and if it's for people who have the hinge down really well. So finding ways to create proper thoracic extension is going to be really important. So that's something that people need to be able to master before we start adding any sort of weight to good mornings. So if we're going to do good mornings, we really want to make sure that we're mastering the hinge. And one of the best ways to create that thoracic extension, which is essentially bringing the rib cage up so we have that anterior tilt in the hips, is to interlock the fingers at the back of the head. And that's going to bring the rib cage up, and then from there we're reaching back. So we maintain that thoracic extension, we maintain the anterior tilt in the hips. So we never want to wait a good morning until we have that quality thoracic extension. Okay, so that's the good mornings. Not a bad exercise, but we really have to be careful of that thoracic extension. The next one is dips. So dips are, again, they're a good exercise, but we have to be careful in how they are performed. So with dips, a lot of times what people will do is they'll have the palms facing forward here. And what happens then when the palms are facing forward, I'll just do a couple of reps here. So as you can see, as I drop down, you can see the head of the humerus is going that way. It's heading anteriorly, which is pushing into the anterior capsule of the shoulder, which can again cause impingement and can be over time wearing and tearing, beating up those joints. So two ways to modify that one would be put the hand on the outside of the box. So if we were to turn the box sideways, put the hands on the outside of the box, and it allows us to go straight down without as much of that anterior gliding of the humerus. Or the way that we did them last week was we had two boxes here, and we're in that kind of almost like a vertical push-up, and we're leaning down into it, getting to about 90 degrees and pushing out. So we have a box on either side. How that was programmed last week was a good way to do dips versus doing it the other way. So other ways to hit the triceps, other ways to hit the upper chest, rather than doing those dips that create that anterior gliding and friction in that capsule of the shoulder. And then the last one is lateral raises. So when we're doing lateral raises here, one of the things that people tend to do is turn the thumbs down, and that is it's another test that physical therapists will do. They'll have you do internal rotation of the shoulder to check for rotator cuff issues. So that's something that we want to avoid. So one of the things that we can do to avoid that internal rotation can be getting into a little bit of a hinge and still doing that same thing. Okay, trying to keep the palms facing forward slightly, just a slight angle, pointing forward, or we can go elbows bent, and it's going to be a lot safer thinking leading with the pinkies or trying to keep the thumbs up. That's going to be a much safer and more beneficial way of taking care of those traps and deltoids. So those are the 7 exercises that I would say I would encourage you to use very sparingly over the course of your programming, and pay attention to the actual movement patterns when we do program, because if we do repetitive movement patterns over the course of a week, somebody that's coming in 5, 6, 7, 8 times a week, over time injury is inevitable. So something to think about. Hope this helps. Talk to you guys next time.